Why is it putting the closed caption? What'd you do? Why is it putting that up there? We don't have that. No, it's not cool. Take it off. You're going to read my message today, apparently. Lee, what did you do? Huh? I'm not going to sit here while everybody watches the words that I say. What if it. I know it. All right, I can fix Lee up. Hold on. We'll be right back.
It was only picking up here. What did you do? It's still doing it. That is funny. Anything up there now? Is it still there? Yep, it's still there. I like it. For us people that are hard of hearing, that's perfect, Pastor. Because when I watch a lot of sermons on Facebook, I love when they have the caption up there because they're in gyms and the sound don't come through on the. Yeah, because mostly like when they say stuff, and then all of a sudden you're like, "What did they just say?" And then you can look real quick and see it. Oh, okay. Are we still live streaming though the whole time? All right, let's see. Nope, nothing. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's still up there. All right, let's go back to Boy Scouts. All right, over here you're gonna be hot, warm, cold, hot, warm, cold, hot, warm. That's all temperature cheer. She don't know that. I don't think cheer's even out as a detergent anymore, is it? Is cheer even detergent anymore? Because see, if you don't know that, there used to be cheer detergent, and it was all temperature cheer. That's what was so funny about that. Now, you don't have that. Like we used to, if you lost anything at camp, the only way you got it back, you had to get on the main table in Boy Scouts and sing Gray Squirrel, I have a little bushy tail, and you had to sing it like that. Or I'm a little tea cow, short and stout. This is my handle, and this is my spout, this is my handle. Tip me over and pour me out. You had to sing that one. And that's if you lost a shirt, socks, anything. Because every time somebody went down to the swimming hole, they would leave clothes. And some kids would be like, it ain't mine. Because they wouldn't get up there and do it. Oh, man, I remember my Boy Scout years. My initiation in Boy Scouts, I had to push a M&M down a chair bench like that with my nose. Right? But they stopped letting it be initiation because they called it child abuse. We had one guy that married, what was the deer? We had a deer on the wall. And every year a kid had to propose to it. Yeah, right? And that was, then one of the guys, I don't know where they got the makeup from, but they always had to dress up like a girl, right? But we went, then they told us the story about Bear Toby, right? Because we were in a hunting lodge. So, hey, y'all want to know the notes? Oh.
All right. We'll try this again. It's not up. No, If it's up there, it's going to stay up there now. All right, technical difficulty solved. So, we will not do this entire lesson. That's not even the right lesson, Lee. Click on that screen so I can do this. There you go. Thank you. All right, let's get back to where we got to go. Nope, not that one. It's all the way at the very end. So we're in John chapter number 8 this week. And 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, actually the last 2 weeks before last week, we talked about the Feast of the Tabernacles, which I actually saw on Facebook. Somebody around here at church is going to do the Feast of the Tabernacles, which is kind of neat. And we discussed what it was all about. So, and why Christ attended, but he attended late. He did a lot of things. And then we get to chapter number 8. But before we start in chapter number 8, look at the last verse of chapter number 7. And it says, "And every man went unto his own house." So after all these things that happened at the Feast of the Tabernacles, where Christ got up and interrupted at the very, if I can get the words out, at the very climax of this celebration, Christ came up, interrupted it, and began to preach. And it made a lot of people mad, especially the Pharisees. And a lot of this lesson now is going to be about the Pharisees. John chapter 8 is a long chapter, but there's a lot packed into it. We're not going to do the whole chapter, I promise. I promise, Brett, I promise. Sort of promise. So, it says in my notes, I'm not even joking, it says the opportunities that this lesson affords for application and expansion are almost limitless. So this could be very long, or it could be very, very short, but I'm not going to do them all. All right? So, remember, all of the stuff at the Feast of the Tabernacles, this was a big event. This was one of the traveling celebrations where people would come from all over to attend this feast. Not all of them were like that. There's just a few. So Jesus attended. Now it's over, and it says every man went unto his own house. But then look in verse number 1 of chapter number 8. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives. Why did he do that? Well, probably because he did not have a home to go to. But he was human. He did have a human body. His body needed rest. After something like this and the things that he had done, the day before was probably one of the hardest days of his life. People were ready to kill him. They were trying to accuse him of things, wanted to put him to death. And so it was a tough day. So Jesus wanted to go somewhere where he could get some rest. So it says he went up to the Mount of Olives. In the first 11 verses, we see some very important characteristics of Christ. Mainly, we see his wisdom. And because of this wisdom, let's see if I can get over to the right there. There we go. We see several things, and we're not going to do all of it. I'm going to in fact, I marked it on here. We're not going very far, and then we're going to finish it next week, or 2 weeks, because Brother Joe's next week. Let's look at the wisdom of Christ in John chapter number 8. First thing, there's notes in here before the slide, and I don't know if I want to preach on these notes because I'm already getting dirty looks. So, but Jesus was an early riser. He got up early. And we should be more Christ-like, babe. Just letting you know. But look in verse number 2, because we can't skip verse number 2. And early in the morning, he came again into the temple. So he just finished everything from the Feast of the Tabernacles. He goes and gets a little bit of rest, not much, because then it says he arose early and came again to the temple, which he just left the day before. And then it says all the people came unto him and sat down, and he taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. When they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And then verse number 8, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Now, let's get into this story a little bit. He got up early, so that's biblical. Getting up early is biblical. We should, for some of us. My wife does get up early during the week. Weekends, not so much, but during the week, she's always the first one up. She wakes me up every morning. Am I out of the doghouse? No, I got a ways to go. I'm below the doghouse. So, but it says everybody went to their houses. Jesus went up the Mount of Olives. They went home. I'm sure they ate. They rested, but Jesus didn't have that luxury. Most likely, Christ went hungry often because of the nature of his time was limited. He didn't have much time on this earth. He knew what he was going to do. And so he gets back up early and heads back to the temple. Now, where he was at was pretty hostile. At the Feast of the Tabernacles, it was not a place that he was very welcomed by the Pharisees. Now, the people, remember when we talked about when they all broke up and they all went their own ways, there was a lot of division. Some believed, some didn't believe, some were confused, and some just rejected outright. Remember all those things we talked about a couple weeks ago. So he decided to go back. Why would he go back to the very place where people wanted to kill him? Anybody have any ideas? They wanted to put him to death. Why would he go back? If I knew today that if I drove down this mountain and went to Food City, that there were people in Food City that wanted me dead, I probably wouldn't drive down there and stop at Food City. But Christ went to the place where he knew people hated him and wanted to kill him. Why would he do that? He loved them. He cared, and he had a mission. He had to reach these people. You know, I know we're still talking about it, but imagine going to a college campus and preaching the gospel. Look what happened with Charlie Kirk. He went to the very place where probably there was more hatred towards him than anywhere else, is on our colleges and university campuses. He went somewhere that he knew, even if he hadn't made it, maybe not spoken it, but he knew it was a dangerous thing for him to do. But yet he did it anyway. Why? Because he knew somebody had to do it. It had to be done. These people had to be reached. These words that he would say had to be said, and he had a platform, an international platform, a worldwide platform to be able to proclaim Christ. And so he took it. Same thing with Christ. Christ went back to the temple where they wanted to kill him because he knew they needed him and what he had to say. The Pharisees, though, had a plan. Now, Christ obviously was in complete control, but the Pharisees had a plan. Their plan was, we're probably not going to be able to trip him up and catch him in sin or anything like that. But what we can do, we can trip him up on some of his doctrine. Maybe we can disprove that he's really the Messiah. So they had this plan. So for 6 months, from the time we're reading now for the next 6 months, they're going to try to catch him in some kind of an error, some kind of a thing. They will not be successful. We know that. At the trial of Christ, we know they would bring accusations against him, and either Christ would just stand silent, or he would tell them, you know, I'm the one that God sent. I'm the Christ. I'm the Messiah. He didn't have to defend himself. So the first thing we see is this test in verses number 3 through 6 there. They came to Jesus to try to tempt him. They wanted to catch him. So they brought this woman who was taken in adultery. And I know a lot of preachers preach on this passage, and they'll talk about, you know, where was the man? It's supposed to be, you know, in the Old Testament, if you committed adultery, you got caught, you were stoned to death. They just brought the woman. They didn't bring the man. They were trying to trick him. They were trying to catch him. Because if he said, or they came and said, the law says this woman is to be put to death because we caught her in the act of adultery. She needs to be put to death. She needs to be stoned. Christ didn't say anything. He just stooped down and started writing things in the dirt. A lot of people speculate about what he wrote. Some people think he may have been writing the names of all those Pharisees that were there. Some people think that he may have been writing down some of their sins, because at this point, the Pharisees had been exposed for who they really were. There wasn't much hiding their true identities anymore. They were spiritual on the outside, but on the inside, people knew they were wrong, they were crooked, they were being deceitful. And so they see the tide turning away from them, who they were the religious leaders, and it was turning towards Jesus, which is what should have happened. What would have even been better is if the Pharisees, who knew the scriptures, who knew the prophecies, would have looked at Christ and said, this is the guy we've been telling you about for so many years. Can you imagine what would have happened had the Pharisees gotten on board? I mean, let's talk about a worldwide revival. They would have reached the entire world. Now, we know they didn't, but yet God used that. Even though Christians later became persecuted, he used that persecution to go out and reach the world. And I'll tell you this, if you refuse to do God's will, if you know what God's will is, but you say, I'm not going to do that, guess what? He'll use somebody else. I don't want God to have to set me aside because I refuse to do his will. I want to be able to be used of God. And any Christian should feel that way. He should say, well, you're up in a pulpit, you're preaching. God hasn't called me to do that, but God's called you to do something. And if you don't do what God has you to do, he'll find somebody else. Don't miss out on God's will. So how do I know what God's will is? Well, pray, read your Bible, seek his face, earnestly seek his face. God reveals his will. It's not like he's up there like he's got his deck of cards up here with everybody's, destiny on it. It's like, I'm going to keep these and see if he can guess which card it is. He's not trying to hide it from us. He wants us to do his will. So we have the Pharisees. They're trying to trip him up. So what they do, they bring this woman, and in their minds, this is what they're thinking. If we can get him to accuse this woman and sentence her to be stoned, then we'll realize everything he's been preaching the last several years has just been for show. Because he's been preaching mercy, forgiveness, turning the other cheek, doing away with the law, because Christ came to fulfill the law. So if we can get him to admit this woman needs to be stoned, then we've got him. But if he says, no, don't stone her, then we see he's breaking the laws of Moses, because this is a commandment that God gave back in the Old Testament. So they think this is foolproof. We've got him either way. He can either agree with us, and then all of his preaching was for nothing, or he can disagree with us and break God's commandment and sin. They had him between a rock and a hard place. There was no escape. Kind of like when you play tic-tac-toe. I love playing tic-tac-toe with my wife because she very seldom wins. That's the one thing I can actually win at with my wife. Because if you make two moves in tic-tac-toe and you do the right two moves first, it doesn't matter where. She can write in any square. But if you make two moves right at the beginning, you're going to win every time. I haven't taught that to my wife. So... because I like beating her at tic-tac-toe. It's the only thing I can win at. So they thought, this is it. This is a done deal. This isn't even a gamble. This is a slam dunk. Just like, the lottery. We don't play the lottery because, it's a gamble. We shouldn't be gambling. Now, if you play the lottery and you win, definitely tithe on it. That would be a good thing. But if somebody today said, here are the winning numbers to this week's lottery, if you go down to the gas station or the grocery store and you punch in these numbers and pay however much it costs, I don't know how much lottery tickets cost, you pay this money, then you are guaranteed this is a 100% certainty this is going to win, $1 billion or however many. It was up pretty high last time. If you were told that today, and well, it'd probably be by some crazy guy, but if you knew that this was a sure thing, you probably say, let's go for it. So the Pharisees were at this point. They said, this is a sure thing. We can do this. We can catch him. We're going to jump on this. We're going to take care of business. But what did Christ do? He didn't say a word. He stooped down and started writing in the sand. Why? I don't really know why. We don't really know what he wrote. But then it says after a few minutes, the Pharisees were just standing there waiting for an answer. And then it says from the eldest down to the youngest, they began to walk away until nobody was left. And Jesus looked up and looked at the woman and said, okay, where's your accusers? She said, they're all gone. He said, okay, well, I guess if your accusers are gone, go and sin no more. In other words, he showed mercy. He didn't catch her in the act. There was nobody there to accuse her. Now, Christ knew whether or not she'd actually committed adultery. And he knew but Christ also knew the heart of the situation. So they tried to test him. And we see in number 2 there was the answer. He knew what they were up to, and so he avoided that. But since now the table flipped around, and so instead of trapping Jesus, Jesus trapped the Pharisees. Christ had obeyed the law, but the Pharisees were now keenly aware that the people knew that the Pharisees themselves were hypocrites. There was no doubt now. He embarrassed them royally, which made them furious. As a preacher, as a member in a church, we've got to be careful about how we treat others. These Pharisees treated others like, they were better than everybody else. The Pharisees were important people. Nobody was as good as them. But yet, people knew them. All right? Just like, if Brother Joe and I have been friends for a long time. And we know about each other's lives. But if I knew that Brother Joe was really a horrible, wicked person, and yet every week he got up here to preach, but I knew everything coming out of his mouth he didn't live it, he just would say it. That kind of hurts your effectiveness as a preacher. The same thing with the Pharisees. Now they were losing a grasp on what they had. They didn't like that. So their only thought now at this point was to find some way to kill him, to get him out of the way, to get rid of him. So they had the next one on there was shame, I think. The shame, verse number 9, showed their shame. They had to walk away, could not say another word. Then we see real quick, and we're almost done, the ignorance of the Pharisees. I'll make sure I go to the right spot. I want to get to just one place. Yep, that's it. We're almost there. So they're ignorant of a few things. Number 1, they were ignorant of his truthfulness, the ignorance of his truthfulness. Look in verse 13 of chapter number 8. And I know we're going a long way around. We're going to get to one point, I promise. The Pharisees, therefore, in verse 13, said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself, thy record is not true. He stood up to them and said, You're ignorant, you're liars, you're not speaking truth. They tried to accuse Christ of lying, but Jesus said, No. I'm the Messiah. I'm the one. In fact, he goes down and look in verse 17. It is written in your law that the testimony of 2 men is true. I am one that bears witness of myself, and the Father that sent me beareth witness of me. In other words, he was trying to say, you're trying to accuse me of something, but if you were to try somebody in a courthouse, if you have 2 witnesses, that's enough to convict somebody. And he says, I have 2 witnesses. Myself, I bear witness of myself, not only through what I say, but you've seen the miracles, you've seen the works. And he says, my Father is the second one. But then they said they were ignorant of his Father. Look in verse 19. Then they said to him, Where is thy Father? Jesus answered, Ye neither know me nor my Father. If ye had known me, you should have known my Father also. So he said, this is my proof. I bear witness of myself, and my Father beareth witness of who I am. And so the Pharisees thought, okay, now we've got it. Who's your father? Jesus. Because they knew the story of Mary and Joseph. Joseph was gone at this point. He was most scholars believe he was dead at this time. So they were ignorant of his father. They thought maybe he was an illegitimate child. They thought he had no standing, no purpose to be in there in the position that he was. He wasn't talking about his earthly father, because then he rebukes him and says, if you had known my Father, then you'd know me. But guess what, Pharisees? You don't know my Father. Who was his Father? God, the one that they were representing. He says, if you would have just known the one that you're speaking about, the one that you worship, the one that you offer sacrifices to, if you would really have known him, then you'd know me. But you don't know God. So since you don't know God, you don't know me. You don't know who I am or why I'm here. They were ignorant of his Father. And when he got to this point, he was in a place where he kind of literally backed himself into a corner. And it talks about it here in the verse in just a second. So you see the gates. This is the temple. It was very tall over here on the right-hand side, three stories tall. And you have different gates. You have the courts out here. You have the eastern gate. You have what's called Gate Beautiful. Then you have the women's court. And what it says, where is it at? Let me find it real quick. Where'd it go? I just lost it. Well, we may not get to it. There, that's what I'm looking for, the treasury. Yeah, there, verse 20. These words spake Jesus in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. So what is the importance of the treasury? The treasury was important because it was in a place right outside the women's court right there, through the gate and one of these little corners. That was the treasury area of the temple. He put himself in a place where there was no exit. There was no way that he could get out. And I think he did that on purpose because he knew his hour had not yet come. It wasn't time for him to die. Now, could the Pharisees have tried to kill him, tried to hit him, tried to abuse him? Yes, they could have. But he used words. He used the Bible. He used his testimony to rebuke the Pharisees. If someone today were to come and accuse you of doing something wrong, our testimonies should be so strong that nobody would believe it. I mean, honest, think about that. Is our testimony and our character enough that if somebody were to accuse us of something, nobody would believe it? Now, we see on the news all the time accusations against politicians and famous people, and we can say, yeah, I could believe that he did that. I could believe that she did that. But Christ, nobody could say that about him. They were ignorant of his Father. They were ignorant of his destiny. There's the treasury gate. I could have gone a little further. They're ignorant of his destiny in verse 22. Then said the Jews, will he kill himself? Go to verse 21, that makes more sense. Then said Jesus again to them, I go my way, and ye shall seek me, and shall die in your sins. Whither I go, you cannot come. Then said the Jews, will he kill himself? Because he saith, whither I go, you cannot come. So they were ignorant of his destiny. Christ was saying, I'm fixing to go to a place very soon that you can't follow. Well, the only place that the Pharisees could think of that he would go where they couldn't follow would be hell. Like, well, he must be going to kill himself and go to hell, because that's the only place he could go where we couldn't see him. Little did they know that that's not the case. Christ was going to go somewhere where they could not go, which was the cross. I think we could take that a step farther and say he was going somewhere else that they could not go, and that's heaven. So are there going to be Pharisees in heaven? There probably will be some, but I think the majority of them will not be there because they didn't even know the one they were worshiping. Then they were ignorant of his identity. In verse number 25, they said unto him, who art thou? And Jesus said unto them, even the same that I said unto you from the beginning. In other words, his message hadn't changed. At the very beginning, he says, I'm Christ, I'm the Son of God. He sent me down, I'm his only begotten Son. They didn't know who he was. They had asked him this many, many, many times before, but he gets to the point now, it's just one of those questions he doesn't even want to respond to. My daughter loves to call me on the phone over and over and over again about the same exact thing, literally like 30 seconds apart. Like if I'm not right there to pick her up for something, she'll call me, Dad, where are you? I'm right around the corner. I'll be right there. 30 seconds, Dad, where are you? I'm like, keep calling me. It's not going to get me there any faster. And then 30 seconds, like, Dad, you said you were almost here. Where are you? I just hung up the phone. I didn't even have time to put it down. And eventually sometimes Maddie will call so many times I just don't answer. But, I mean, if you've had kids, you know they like to ask a lot of questions over and over and over. The one at church I hear the most is, when is Dad going to be over? But, yeah, look at Maddie. It's her fault. I'm on the almost last point. We had technical difficulties, so it's not my fault. So they asked who he was, and Christ didn't even dignify this one with an answer. He said, I'm the same person I said I was from the beginning. My name hasn't changed. My mission has not changed. My goals haven't changed. I'm the same person. Go back a couple of years ago when you asked me this question, same answer. I don't know what else to tell you. Then, lastly, they were ignorant of their own history. Look in verse 33. They answered him, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? And this is where we're going to stop for the day. They were ignorant of their own history. Now, they were saying, how can you say that we're going to be free? Because in verse 32 it says, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's a very common phrase. We hear that a lot today. The Pharisees heard that phrase, and they're like, what are you talking about? Setting us free? What does that even mean? We're of Abraham's seed, but we've never been in bondage. They were referring back to the Old Testament where the Israelites were in bondage constantly because they'd do wrong. Christ would judge them. They'd get their hearts right. They'd be free, and then they'd mess up again, be back in bondage. What Christ was trying to tell them here, in fact, in the Roman custom of this time, if a father of the family were to die, the eldest son that was still there would take over as the fatherly figure or the head of the household at that point. When that would happen, and we're talking about the Roman custom here, and it bled over into the Jewish customs as well, I'm sure. The son had the opportunity right there to free the father's slaves. It was up to the son. So he could free the slaves after the father died, if he chose to. But the Pharisees knew this. So when he talked about being free, they knew what freedom was. They were thinking in earthly terms of being in bondage or being captured or oppressed. Here's the thing, though. They were in bondage to the Romans. But even at that, they didn't even acknowledge that the Romans were in charge. I have my opinion on why I think they weren't worried about that, because I think the Romans probably paid a lot of their salaries. Now, can I say it's true out of the Bible? No, but I think you can probably infer that from a few passages. They obviously did not know God. God knew their heart, and he called them out. He says, you don't even know the God you're serving. Because if you knew the God that you were serving, you wouldn't be rejecting me right now. We only read of, one Pharisee that came to Christ, and he was a coward. You got Nicodemus. There were, I promise, there were hundreds, if not thousands more. But they said, our forefathers, they were enslaved in Egypt. They knew that, years and years ago, centuries ago, the Assyrians had them in bondage. The Babylonians had them in bondage. And at that very moment, they were in bondage to the Romans, but they refused to acknowledge that. And they said, well, we've never been in bondage. And I'll tell you what, the world says that to us today. They say, you go to church, you're in bondage. You live under all these rules and restrictions. But I'll tell you what is bondage? Sin will keep you in bondage. You say, what are you talking about? And I've heard a lot of people that grew up in church that turn their backs on the things of God and say, I don't want to live under the bondage, under all these rules and the regulations that are in the Bible. God never asked us to do that. Do you realize that? God's only called us to be saved. Once we're saved and we love the Lord and Christ lives within us, our desire will change where we will want to do what pleases God. But God never says you have to do this, you have to do that, you can't do this, you can't do that in order to get into heaven. Nothing we can do. I had a conversation with a man yesterday about talking about how wicked our world is and how so many people, he was witnessing to someone who was a Catholic and said, I've tried to do good things, and I hope when I die I can go to heaven. I don't want to hope. When I die, I want to know that I'm going to heaven. And it was kind of neat because Jackson had been saved last week, and then I had to talk with this gentleman who would talk to another person that said that. And the difference between the two people, our pastor at our church, or Pastor Gamble there, he asked Jackson, do you know you're going to heaven when you die now? And Jackson said, yeah, I know I'm going to heaven. Well, how do you know? Because I asked Jesus in my heart. He forgave me my sins. It's pretty simple enough. If Jackson can understand it, anybody can. But Jackson has something different than this other guy that I heard, well, bleh, if I can get the words out today, we'd be good. The man I spoke to yesterday was telling me about the man that he was witnessing to. I said, I hope I get to heaven. What's the difference? Jackson put his faith in Christ. This other man put his faith in the things that he could do. There is nothing we could do. In fact, if we piled all of our good works up in a big pile, it would not be enough to get us to heaven. You say, well, what if your good works outweigh your bad works? Most likely they won't, because a lot of times we deceive ourselves when we think, oh, we're pretty good people. We're not. If in fact, I doubt anybody in this room, if we were able to do it today, if we were able to put up on this screen your whole life and all the good things and bad things that you had done in your life, not one person in this room would want to be in this room. We'd all head for that door pretty quick. We don't want anybody seeing what we've done. Why? Because if we really look into our hearts, we know that we're not good people. It's only by the grace of God that he saved us. So he said that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The Pharisee said, but free from what? We're not in bondage. And Christ was trying to tell him, you'll be free from the bondage of sin. So what do you mean the bondage of sin? The world will keep you in bondage, even though they'll preach Christianity is bondage. Being a conservative is being in bondage. But yet, they've got it so backwards. They can't see because they're blinded. In fact, Satan himself will do anything he can to blind the world, to keep them from seeing the truth, to make them think that what they have is freedom. But it's not freedom. Whether they're in bondage to a pill or to a bottle or to something they do, a lifestyle. And this is the thing. They took it as a thing of, being enslaved. Christ was not talking about slavery. He was talking about a spiritual freedom. He said, what does a spiritual freedom mean? If you know Christ, that knowledge we have of Christ, that'll set you free. And no longer do you have to worry about the bondage of sin. And my wife and I have had this conversation several times, and I may have even talked about it with some of you. When I was younger, and I'd hear preachers talk about the end times, the rapture, the tribulation, all these things, and it says in Revelations that there'll be a great delusion over everybody, and everybody's going to believe the Antichrist, and they're going to believe this lie. When I was younger, I was like, how in the world is one person going to convince an entire worldwide community? How is he going to convince them all to believe a lie? But the older I get, the more I can see it. They say we're brainwashed because we read the Bible. They say we're brainwashed because we go to church. But yet, if they see something on Facebook or they see something on the internet or on the news, well, they're going to believe that 100%. They don't even know where these sources are coming from. I'm sorry, I know where my information's coming from. It's coming from this book. If you get on Facebook and you read stuff long enough, or you get on the internet and read stuff long enough, guess what? You're going to start to believe some of this. Oh, well, somebody wrote this down. This must be true. I never could understand how one person could send a worldwide lie and have everybody believe it. But look at what we have today. It doesn't even have to be true. You can say something and throw it out there on the internet, and the entire world will believe it if they want to. And the thing is, those that are unsaved, they want to believe anything they can that'll give them some kind of hope, that'll give them some kind of happiness, but they're not going to find it until they find it in God's Word. I don't want to have a hope-so salvation. I want to know-so salvation. I want to know the truth. There's a lot of people that get up and say, I'm telling you the truth. This is what it is. This is what you should do. Don't believe any of the stuff you see on TV. What's the saying? Only believe half of what you see. Something like that. Or half of what you read and none of what you see, or something like that. The truth shall set you free, just like the Pharisees. They were ignorant of a lot of things. But the biggest one they were ignorant of was their own relationship with Christ. Their own relationship with God. That's the relationship that matters. Let's not be ignorant of that. Let's be aware of what Satan's trying to do. And we'll trust God to do the rest. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time together. Lord, I pray you help us this week. I know we didn't get through much of this lesson, God, but I pray that you'll help us with this truth. Lord, help us to realize you are the truth, and the truth that you have in your word is what will set us free. It'll free us from sin, free us from the bondage of sin, free us from an eternity separated from you. We thank you for your word. We thank you for all you've done for us. We thank you for the answered prayers we've seen this week. And God, I pray that you'll just bless us and watch over us this week.